Hi, Chef Coco here. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to make a delicious tomato basil soup. You see tomato basil soup on many menus in restaurants these days. It's really easy to make and it can be a spin-off for all sorts of flavors. You could do a Thai basil tomato soup. You could do an Italian. Today we're just going to make it with coconut milk instead of cream, which will make it vegan or plant-based. So let's go ahead and get started. So our ingredients that we're going to be using today are pretty simple. Diced tomatoes in juice. We have some paprika, garlic, some vegetable base, celery, tomato paste, coconut milk, and an onion. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So the first thing we're going to do is chop our onion. So I have a whole yellow onion here. I'm just going to cut the ends off. And this is a sweet onion. You can use just about any kind of white or yellow onion for this dish. And I'm going to cut it in half. And then carefully just take the skin and peel the skin away from the onion, trying not to take off too much of the layers, but you want to get that papery layer off. So the next thing I'm going to do is slice horizontally, and then I'm going to slice vertically because I'm doing a rough chop for this dish because it's going to be pureed. You really don't need to have a fine chop for this because it's just going to get pureed before it's finished. So that was one half. We'll go ahead and do the next half, same way. Notice I'm keeping my fingers away from the blade of the knife at all times for food safety. So next I'm going to peel and chop my garlic. This is fresh garlic. And basically I'm just going to bang the back of the knife onto the garlic, and that will pull the papery layer away, and I'll just pull it out because I'm going to chop it. It doesn't matter that it's smashed. And I'm going to cut the end off where the root is. And I'm just going to carefully peel the rest of the paper away. And do it for the other one. Peeling it. These are nice sized garlic cloves, depending on where you get them and what time of the year. They can be very large or very small. But these look like nice sized cloves. And I believe these came from California, which is one of the largest growing regions of garlic in the United States. And a lot of our garlic also comes from overseas. So now I'm just going to do a small barrel cut, and I'm checking to make sure there's no green sprout in it, because if the garlic's old, you'll see that little green sprout. That means the garlic's already sprouting, and you'll want to pull that out if you see it. It's actually very common when we get into months that we don't have access to fresh garlic, because that will make your dish bitter. So now I have my onions and my garlic chopped. I'll put that to the side. And I'm going to give my board a quick wipe. so I could go on to the next thing. and I would be using sanitizer for this in a bucket. So now I'm going to start cooking my onions and my celery. I have my burner here. I'm going to be using a heavy bottom pot for this. Always when you make soup, you want to put soup in a heavy bottom pot so it doesn't scorch or burn. Aluminum pots, the thin ones, are good for like cooking pasta or boiling potatoes. But if you're going to be making something that you're stirring, and like a soup where it's got to cook on the low for a while, you want to make sure that you have a heavy bottom pot to do that. Here I'm just adjusting the camera. So one thing I did forget to do, which we'll go back and do really quickly, is just chop up my celery. And I'm cutting the ends off if the ends are dirty. I've washed the celery and I'm just going to split it so I can cut it in smaller pieces. This is the same technique you would use for making celery sticks, but you would cut them larger. So I'm just going to give that a rough chop. I just want a bit of celery in my dish. So now that that's done, we can go back to the sauteing of the ingredients. Okay, now I'm feeling my pot is hot enough. I put my hand there to see how hot it is. And I'm putting some olive oil in, a couple of tablespoons. You just want to keep the vegetables from sticking with the olive oil. You could use vegetable oil as well, like canola oil or grapeseed oil, but I tend to cook with pretty much olive oil as my basic oil. So now I'm just waiting for it to heat up and to start to see that sheen, where you can see if it starts to thin out. So now I'm going to add my onions and celery and garlic, and I'm going to give that a stir, and I'm just going to keep cooking it till it softens and it deglazes and starts to break down. So you can see now that the pan's getting a little brown. I added some water to it, to the bottom of the pan, because it was starting to stick and starting to overcook. If you add water to it, it'll stop that browning process. It's called the Maillard effect, and it will slow it down. Now you can also saute with just water. How you would do it, you'd start with water in the pan and add the vegetables, and just add a little bit more water at a time until the vegetables cooked. This is used to cook for folks that are on a no oil diet. So now I'm going to add my paprika, because I like to get my spices going with the vegetables and make sure that they're well coated. I'm using a Hungarian paprika, and I'm just going to stir it in. Till it's coated. Because this is going to be the aromatics for the dish. We talked about aromatic vegetables being celery, onions, and carrots. And they're like the basis of a lot of flavors for soups. So now I'm going to add my tomato paste, and I'm going to add the entire can. Just going to get all of it out. Now if you have a larger can of tomato paste and you need to just use part of it, you can always freeze the rest of it. Just take it out of the can. So I'm going to give that a good stir, because I want to coat the onions as well and incorporate the tomato paste into the mixture. And I'm frying it a bit to just bring out some of the sweetness of the paste. Mixing it up. So I'm adding just a little bit of water just to release it. Just keep stirring. You want to cook it for a few minutes. And then I'm going to add my diced tomatoes. And now I'm going to add my water. And I'm using 2 quarts of water here. And I'm going to give it a stir just to incorporate and make sure there's no bits stuck on the bottom. And now I'm going to add my Better Than Bouillon paste. And in the commercial kitchens, you'll see all different kinds of bases that are used for the basis of soups and sauces. This happens to be vegetable because we're going to make this soup plant-based. So I'm going to use a plant-based stock. So I've added the water mixed with the paste will be the stock that is being used for the soup. So now I'm going to let it cook, and we'll come back later. Okay, so here we are. Our soup's been cooking for about 30 minutes, and the flavors have all melded. The vegetables are nice and soft. We're going to give it a stir. Make sure. Now we're going to start adding a few more ingredients. We'll add our coconut milk. And coconut milk in a can is separated. It has the water and then the cream, and they're usually in 2 different parts of the can. And this is how you can tell if you're using really good coconut milk. You want to use virgin coconut milk if you can get it. It's a designation similar to olive oil as far as being the best product on the market, because coconut milk has a lot of starch in it, and you can get a lot of coconut milk that's not really coconut milk. They just stretch it out to get a better yield out of it. So it's one of those things where you get really what you pay for. If it's really inexpensive, chances are there's a lot of stabilizers and starch that they use in it. Cornstarch I've seen sometimes in cans. So I'm just going to incorporate that in and stir it and make sure that all those clumps are melted of it. And now I'm going to get my immersion blender and I'm going to puree it. Looks smooth. Okay, so now I'm just checking it with my spoon just to make sure there's no lumps, that I didn't miss anything with it. Looks pretty smooth. You just want to make sure that you puree it as smooth as possible. And this is a thin soup. This would be a nice soup for sure that I got all the lumps. You see there's a few pieces hanging. So now that's done, I'm going to chop up my basil because that's going to be my garnish for my soup. And I have a couple of different kinds of basil from my garden. But I have a large leaf basil, which I'm going to chop first. And I'm going to chiffonade, which is a cut that we talked about. And I'm just going to roll them together. Roll them up as tight as I can and just cut it into little bitty ribbons, thin as you can possibly get it. So this other basil, I have a few more large pieces that I'll cut up. But the other basil is a Greek basil, and it's tiny little leaves, and it's really interesting to work with because you just chop the whole thing. So I'm just going to chop it all together. The flavor is very similar, but it's just like a little tiny basil bush. And it's really just about the same flavor as the large leaf, just a different variety of basil. So I'm doing here the rock chop. Giving it a good chop. So now I have my soup, and I'm going to add my chopped basil to it. Give it a good stir. And that basil is a really nice match with tomatoes. Give it a taste. Tastes great.